Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Yes, now I can hear myself, also over the loudspeakers. Good morning, everyone. Two Germans standing on the stage speaking English, but we announced this talk in English because we wanted to have some guests from Britain who unfortunately then couldn't make it. But since it was announced in English, we'll do it in English. Because I guess we have some international guests here as well. So the way we'll do it is I'll tell you a bit about the case of Reporters Without Borders versus the German intelligence agency BND. Then Ulf will chime in with some information about strategic litigation and the strategic aspect behind that. And then we'll talk a little more about the specific case of Reporters Without Borders, and then we'll have an open Q&A. And we won't be talking long, so bear with us while we are setting the stage, and then I hope we can have a discussion about the strategicness of litigation and how we can also make it work here in Germany.
Exactly.
Okay, so Reporters Without Borders sued the German intelligence agency BND last year in July. The reason we did that was because we are saying that the surveillance that they're doing is, first of all, overbroad, and secondly, indiscriminate. And on a different count, that they're running a database that has no legal grounds in Germany. First part is, from what the media reported and found out in Germany, and also what the parliamentary Untersuchungsausschuss? Inquiry committee, the parliamentary inquiry committee also found out, is that in Germany the BND collects millions and millions of emails every year to search them. Now, the way they search them is unclear, but this is also part of what we'd like to find out by suing them. Because we hope that we'll get some more information about that. Now, what we're assuming, though, is if millions and millions of emails, especially the ones that are exchanged with foreigners, are surveilled in Germany, or first of all, collected. Now, we can talk a lot about what surveillance actually is, but they are collected and partly analyzed. Now, if that is the case, then we claim that there's basically no way that emails from Reporters Without Borders or sent to Reporters Without Borders from journalists in foreign countries will not end up in that dragnet. Because there is a specific situation for journalists in Germany, we have a very good shield law here. We claim that this is against the law. And if it were decided by the Federal Administrative Court in Leipzig, this is where we had to file the suit against the BND, that this is unlawful, this would also have an impact on the practices that the BND is doing in general. So this is the first part. The second part is that they are running this database that is called VERAS, Verkehrsanalysesystem in German, you know, traffic analysis system, traffic of course, in the sense of electronic communications traffic. Now, the fact that they're running it, and it's pretty clear that they're running it, and collecting about 500 million sets of metadata each month means that this is data retention. Now, there was no legal ground for data retention at the time that we filed the lawsuit, and there could be a good discussion about the question of whether now that we have a data retention law again, this would make this practice legal. At the time that we filed the lawsuit, in our opinion, it was clearly illegal that they were doing this because data retention did not have a legal ground in Germany. Now, that's the substance of the case, and now I'll hand over to Ulf, and he'll say a little bit about the strategic litigation.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias, for your overview about over the case that you just brought last year. I'd like to invite you to think with me about the role that litigation can play in a whole landscape of advocacy to encourage civil rights. Let's stay with the example that Matthias just brought about, the example of surveillance of internet traffic, for example, email. The NSA Inquiry Committee of the German Parliament found out that a lot of this surveillance is currently not on any legal basis. So there is no statutory authorization for what many German agencies do at this point, which is really interesting and concerning. But what is the reaction in the political sphere in Germany? Well, most politicians think that it's not that bad, actually. We just have to change the law in a way so that it covers whatever the agencies do. So basically, you take the example of lawbreakers and then you twist the law to cover what they have been doing. And from a civil rights perspective, this, of course, means that civil rights can be diminished by breaking them. And Matthias and I and many others in this country think that this is not the way that government agencies should act. But the question is, how can you actually change their behavior and how can you change politics? If there is no sufficient political will to actually rein in what these agencies do, well, then maybe you have to twist the political landscape in order to encourage your goals. And this is basically where litigation comes into play. You have to think about what success means in the field of litigation. Well, of course, if you bring a case to a certain court, then you want this case to be won. Of course, you want the court to agree with what you're writing in your complaint. That would be the ideal outcome. But let's be realistic, this might not be the outcome that you can achieve in just a single lawsuit. So you have to be a little bit more modest when it comes to success. For example, a lawsuit might get lost in the first time you bring it. This was the case with the first lawsuit that the lawyer brought, that Reporters Without Borders now hired. He lost practically the same case with a very, well, fishy reasoning from the Leipzig court. Let's put it that way. Many legal experts agree that this reasoning is flawed. And so what do? They don't just give up. They bring the case a second time, this time with the assistance of Reporters Without Borders. So success doesn't necessarily mean you always win your case, but you can already get some kind of legal reasoning in place, and then you have at least some kind of a legal debate. Legal scholars might try to address issues, might then try to convince courts to decide in a different way in the second instance, or you can encourage a public debate. So basically, the success that you might have with a case is much broader than just the holding that the court might come to in a first instance. So you have to see lawsuits in a much broader sense than just in the sense of winning a case outright in the first instance. It's basically something that you have to embed in a whole strategy in order to encourage civil rights. And now let's talk a little bit with Matthias about the strategy that Reporters Without Borders had to bring this particular case.
Yeah, what Ulf already mentioned is that as an organization, you need to think about a couple of things bringing such a lawsuit. First of all, many of you might not know what Reporters Without Borders actually is or does. You know, many people, because of the name, it's pretty obvious, associate or compare that to Doctors Without Borders, but actually Reporters Without Borders is an advocacy organization only. We do have emergency help capacities, but this does not mean that we send journalists into crisis areas, but we help journalists from crisis areas. For example, if they need legal help, if they need medical help and things like that. So it's not that we deploy journalists to crisis areas, because that is what the media do usually, and we try to support that. So the mandate of Reporters Without Borders is freedom of information. Now, how do we protect freedom of information? As an advocacy organization, we try to raise issues, we try to bring issues into the public debate, and most of the time these issues are from countries unlike Germany, where freedom of information and freedom of expression is under much bigger pressure than it is here, right? So first, what we discussed in our organization was, would we want to bring a case in Germany at all? Because we had to think about whether this is in line with our mandate. You know, when we're talking about countries like Syria, Iran, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, can we as an organization really afford, or is it the will of our constituency that we bring a case like this? Now, we discussed about this for quite some time, and then we decided in the end, yes, that first of all it is, because we also have to guard press and information freedom in Germany as well. Secondly, you know, our constituency is here. the people who are members of Reporters Without Borders, the people to donate to Reporters Without Borders are in Germany. So this is also a reason for an organization like ours to bring a case like this in Germany, right? The second aspect is, as Ulf just said, winning the case is probably not the only goal. It's not probably, it is certainly not the only goal of a strategic lawsuit like the one we filed, because we expect, at least on the one count that was already dealt with by the Leipzig court in the past, we will probably lose again, you know? As Ulf said, it was a very strange reasoning that the court gave, but there's not really a reason to expect the court to give a better reasoning the next time. You know, we'll probably lose on that count. We're a little more optimistic on the count of the legal basis that is not there for the data retention. But you know, let's see what happens.
And there has been a little legal debate, at least. I mean, the first decision from the Leipzig court was so bad that many legal scholars published articles about it, journal articles, and so there has been criticism, and maybe the judges might revisit the question. But you're right; you never know, right?
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be the end of the story, right? I mean, even if you lost again on that count in Leipzig, that wouldn't be the end of your lawsuit, would it?
Exactly, and that's the point. We had to think about what do we do if we lose, in case we lose, because it's not so unlikely that we lose in that instance. And in that case, we will go to the Constitutional Court in Germany, which is, well, let's put it that way, in an optimistic framing, that is good for two more reasons. First of all, we might then win in the end after all, right? Because they might overturn the ruling of the administrative court. Secondly, to have a lawsuit, to bring a lawsuit to the Constitutional Court gives us another opportunity to raise awareness for the issue in the media, among advocates and activists, and so on and so forth. So this is, of course, a very important aspect of filing that suit in the first place. But at the same time, as an organization, we have to make sure that, for example, we really want to dedicate our resources to that, because it wouldn't make much sense to go to the court of the, I mean, it's not the first instance, it's already the federal court, but it's the administrative court, to go there, lose, and then say, okay, that's the end of it. We tried. Thanks a lot for bearing with us, but this is it. No, of course we have to be prepared to do a step after that, and we are prepared to do that.
Yeah, and I think this is a very interesting aspect of what Matthias just said. You have to embed your case in a whole communication strategy, because of course courts will hand out press releases, and even some other pressure groups might hand out press releases, but you don't want this to be the end of the story as well. You want your own viewpoint to be communicated, and at least in the German media sphere, lawsuits are news. So as soon as you bring a case, and this case doesn't just concern like a neighbor's dispute, then this case will usually be reported on by the media. So you can raise awareness for civil rights issues, for legal issues, for political issues by bringing a lawsuit. But if you do it in a proper way. So define a media strategy beforehand, have a realistic idea of what success might mean in this particular case. As Matthias said, the realistic expectation in this case is they might lose in Leipzig, but they then go to the Constitutional Court, and then they might change the law for the better. And I think this is really important, have a holistic view of that case, which is not only a legal case, but it's also a communications case and a political case.
I'd like to talk about one last issue before we open for questions and discussion, and that is the question of standing in Germany, because that is I think a very important aspect of this entire strategic litigation idea. Unlike the United States and unlike Britain, as far as I know, we have a much harder case here in Germany in many of the problems that we are facing, that we need to establish standing with the court. That means we have to show that we are really affected by the law that we are trying to overturn, or by the decision that we are trying to overturn. And this is specifically problematic in our case, because it was basically a catch-22 argument that the court made in the first round. Let's call it the first round. You know, the similar lawsuit that the lawyer filed 2 years ago or 3 years ago. The court basically said that he was not, at least in one argument, that he was not successful in establishing that he was really affected by the law, by the surveillance of the German intelligence agency, but at the same time, of course, the German intelligence agency will never tell you whether they surveilled you or not, right? So what that meant is that basically you have no protection by the law if the court argues like that, you know? And it shows some, or sheds some light on one of the most important problems that we have in Germany, that there are very few legal areas where we can, for example, file suits that are similar to a class action lawsuit. You know, that's basically, in most cases, impossible in Germany. You always have to establish this standing, meaning that you were really affected by the law. And that is not easy, and that means that in strategic litigation, you also have to think hard about who is going to file the suit itself.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect, because you basically have to build your case. You can't just like open your eyes and look where there is a great case, but you have to have an idea of the legal issues that you want to bring, and then you have to handpick the best plaintiff, the best complainant, in order to bring a compelling case. However, the standing requirement that Matthias just mentioned isn't like specific to German law. US courts have thrown out surveillance cases as well, or have, for example, thrown out drone strike cases on the basis of missing standing. So this is not specific to German law. To the contrary, the German Constitutional Court is relatively more lenient when it comes to the standing requirement. For example, you do have to prove, at least according to the first Leipzig decision, you do have to prove standing if you want to claim that you have been targeted by surveillance. But if you go to the Constitutional Court, then it's sufficient to bring a compelling argument that you might be concerned by a surveillance law, at least if you challenge the law directly, if you bring a so-called facial challenge to the law. And this is why it is probably so much more promising to end up at the Karlsruhe level, because they have a different standing requirement.
Okay, so much from us. I think we talked long enough. Is there anyone who has any questions regarding that or would like to start a discussion? Okay, we have a moderator doing that.
If you have a question, please stand up.
Yes, I could stand up. I wonder if this could be a role model for fighting mass surveillance at all, in general. So what you do is, if I understood it right, looking at the special rights of journalists, and there are special rights about surveillance of journalists in Germany. But if they could not guarantee to keep that law, they should, they had to kick the whole thing, yeah. And as there are other groups in Germany, like lawyers or doctors, who have the same special laws about surveillance, did you ever think about working together with lobbies of those groups? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I do. Well, from a let's say let's call it a public relations point of view, we've been doing that a lot. We have a lot of press releases that we issued where we combined our case or our argument with the argument of, for example, of lawyers and other people who also have these shield laws. Yes, we've been doing that. And as I said, or as Ulf already said, they're basically parallel cases that we have in Leipzig. One is filed by a lawyer and one is filed by a journalist organization. The also important and interesting question that you asked is, what about the general outcome of this case? And especially on the second part of it, the one with the metadata collection, there it doesn't really, I mean, our argument does not have anything really to do with journalists or lawyers in that case, but we're saying that there are no legal grounds. So if this would be accepted by the court, unlikely as it is, but if this were accepted by the court, this would mean that this practice would have to end in general, not just for lawyers, not just for journalists, but in general. So yes, in many cases, in these kinds of lawsuits, the people who would benefit from a positive result, from a positive outcome, seen from our perspective, of course, not from the BNDs, would not be the people who are suing, but basically the general public. Yeah.
How is it so unlikely that you could win the case?
For political reasons, I'd call that, you know.
Yeah, well, actually, the reason is that a very similar case was already brought by the same lawyer, but in his own name, like 2 or 3 years ago. And that was lost on that standing ground that Matthias just lined out. So the court would have to revisit this question in order to come to a different outcome. This is possible, as I said, because there has been so much criticism in the legal realm about the first decision. But you know, it hasn't been so long, so the court might just find the same reasoning that it found last time. But then again, Reporter Without Borders would go to the Constitutional Court, and as there is a constitutional guarantee for legal review of administrative action in Germany, and the Leipzig court significantly diminishes this opportunity to seek legal review, a court review, I think the Constitutional Court would probably not agree with what the Leipzig court held. But you never know, right?
And what I meant with that statement, you know, for political reasons, of course, judges have a certain idea of how the world is supposed to work, and the judges at the Federal Administrative Court in Leipzig, in Germany, they are not very likely to think that the powers of the BND should be curtailed. That's what I'm saying, you know. They are interpreting a law and they can interpret it this way or that way, and then even if some experts afterwards say, well, that was a bad reasoning, you know, you still have probably a negative outcome of the case itself.
But maybe to add a positive line to that, the fact that they were so super strict on standing is probably because they know if the case was admissible, right? If standing was agreed with, then factually the case would probably be lost for the BND because there is just no legal basis for the surveillance, which in itself is kind of an indicator that the case isn't that bad as you might think.
One final question. There's time for one final question. Hand signs, please.
Oh, okay. we were told that we'd get the 5 minutes that we started later.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Daria. I have a question regarding the lawsuits that have been filed regarding data retention. I think it's 4 different lawsuits already that have gone in. And I think there's some more to come. People have announced some more. I was wondering, with your legal expertise, could you maybe tell us a little bit how they differ from each other? Why is it 4 different ones? Is it good that there's many lawsuits? Is it maybe not so good? Just your general view on this.
Well, that's a pretty complex question because I know one lawsuit pretty well. I only know like the outlines of the others, so I can't really compare the reasoning in detail. Generally, I think it's a good idea if the same legal questions are addressed from different viewpoints. So different viewpoints in terms of professional background, societal background, because that basically enables the Karlsruhe Constitutional Court to really see a holistic picture of the issues at stake in this case. But on the other hand, you want to coordinate your cases, and this is why I'm a little bit skeptical, for example, about the case that is still about to be brought by Digital Courage, for example, because they did not really coordinate with the others. And they raise a lot of money where nobody really knows where it's going. And this lawsuit is still in the making. They are kind of like desperately looking for input on the internet, and this looks a little bit scary to me, to be quite honest. You should, if you bring such a case, and especially if you launch a PR campaign about such a case, then you want to be sure that you're going to have the means to follow up on your promises, right? But the first 4 cases, I think, demonstrate that it's possible to bring a very good constitutional case even without enormous funding, because the others did not really start a large crowdfunding campaign. You do need money, of course, but in Germany, for example, you need significantly less money than in other countries. So a low, like 10 to 20,000 euros is a significant amount of money to bring a compelling case. And this is basically a great opportunity because in the UK, for example, you would have to spend about 10 times as much to hire the lawyers and to bring such a case. Well, these are estimates, right? And when it comes to the outcome of the case, I really don't know. Because there is a large probability that the case will have to be referred to the European Court of Justice, because there has been a decision last year about data retention. Maybe the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe says, well, we want to have their opinion on what the German legislator did this time. Maybe not. They are not compelled to, but there is a large probability that they might do that. But nobody knows what the European courts would do. So I think it's good that the cases have been brought. It would have been even better if the cases had been coordinated more closely, and the outcome is really not to be known so far. Thanks.
One remark, or one thing I'd like to add, and I'm not ashamed to do this here because Ulf just started to talk about money. These lawsuits cost money, and also it's very important to get some public help with that, some assistance. We have a petition on our website, on the German Reporters Without Borders website, that you can sign to show that you also think that this law should be turned around or turned over. So please, everyone who speaks German and who wants to support us there, go to our website, Reporters Without Borders Germany, and sign that petition. It's easy to find. And secondly, you know, if you yourself want to, or if you know some friends who would like to do that, you can join the organization. You can become a member of Reporters Without Borders, and you can also donate money, and you can, of course, say that these donations should go to the costs of these strategic litigation cases that we have. Because, you know, that's what it comes down to. We always need resources and money to fight these cases, even if the outcome are then positive for everyone, for the entire, or specifically because the outcomes could be good for everyone and not only the journalists among ourselves.
Yeah, just think where you put your money. I just signed up for a membership of Reporter Without Borders, for example.
Thank you very much.
So I think this is a good cause that they are having, but choose your donation company wisely. That's fine.
Thank you both very much for being here. I forgot one thing. I highly recommend to listen to Ulf's podcast, Die Lage der Nation, as well, for further information. And I'm sure the speakers can be approached aside of the stage.
Totally.
Thank you very much, and see you soon again.